When Sandra Kalosky was found dead inside her Connecticut home in March, people in East Haddam were stunned. And not just because her death was ruled a homicide by blunt trauma to the head.
What are the odds that two women, wives of the same man, die in the same house? I'm not aware of it happening before.
19 years before Sandra's death, Robert Kalosky's then-wife, Paula, also died a violent death inside the home on North Moodus Road. Robert was the one who found her in bed, a bullet through the head. In the short time it took Paula's brother John Carbo to drive over to her house, cops had already determined a cause of death.
The officer greets me at the door telling me that my sister has committed suicide.
Paula Kalosky's cause of death was officially ruled a suicide by the deputy chief medical examiner. His primary reason for the ruling:
the reason why he concluded that it was a suicide was really based upon the police report that was provided to him.
Is there any way she could have committed suicide?
None. Absolutely none.
But was critical evidence in the case overlooked by investigators?
Was the ball dropped here?
I think there may have been some foregone conclusions, initially when they responded.
Paula's heartbroken brother was determined to prove that his sister didn't take her life.
I requested all the information from the state.
But you're not a trained detective.
True, absolutely. But when you looked at the crime scene pictures, it was a staged event.
The first thing John found suspicious, the family photos placed on the bed surrounding his sister's body.
The pictures are facing out.
Why does that seem strange to you?
Well, if you're in bed and these pictures are going to be your last pictures or objects that you're going to look at in this lifetime, why wouldn't they be facing you?
And that wasn't even the strangest issue with the photos.
If she shot herself after looking at the photos, you'd think that there would be blood all over the photos.
But there doesn't appear to be any blood splatter on the frames. John believes that's because the pictures were placed there after Paula was shot.
But unfortunately, the police never actually collected the photographs at the crime scene.
So we don't know whose fingerprints are on them.
Correct.
Blood splatter was found on his sister's hands, but strangely, one of those hands was under the comforter.
I mean, how does blood get on a hand when the hand is under the cover, if in fact it was a suicide?
Well, if you're
Once you're dead and you shoot yourself in the head, you can't put your hand on the cover, right?
Correct. I think she put her hands up in some kind of a defensive fashion.
The morning of Paula's death, detectives took samples from her hands to test for gunshot residue. But the swabs were never processed until her brother forced the state crime lab to do it. The results of that test?
Paula had no gunshot residue on her hands.
But neither did Kalosky.
Well, Kalosky had plenty of time to wash his hands. But if she committed suicide, she would have had gunshot residue on her hands.
Because of an unusual request by the 911 operator, the location of the gun Paula allegedly used to kill herself provided no clues in the case.
So what I want you to do is get the gun away from her, okay? So I want you to put it somewhere safe, and I want you to go and sit out on your front step and wait for the police department, okay?
Why would a 911 operator tell Robert Kalosky to pick up the gun and move it? I don't understand that.
We never could understand that.
Despite the evidence and questions uncovered by John, police still wouldn't reopen the case. Within 10 months of Paula's death, John asked a retired detective to look at his findings. It only took a few days to hear back.
He calls me Friday at 7 o'clock. He said, we need to talk.
John says that detective told him his sister didn't commit suicide. She was likely murdered and the crime scene was staged. The detective then convinced attorney Steve Reck to take the case.
When he showed me the facts and I first looked at it, I said, there's no way that Paula Kalosky could have killed herself.
And if Paula didn't commit suicide, everyone agreed her husband Robert must know more than he was telling. And one of the only ways to get him to talk, a wrongful death lawsuit.
To try to get the facts out that the police never got.
Before the lawsuit could be filed, a judge needed to remove Robert Kalosky as administrator of his wife's estate. Kalosky fought back, accusing his former brother-in-law of trying to ruin his reputation and ruin him financially. In the end, after hearing the evidence uncovered by Paula's brother, the judge sided with him, and Robert Kalosky lost control of his late wife's estate. In the next year, Steve Reck began digging into Robert and Paula's finances at the time of her death, and what he found was astounding.
The forensic accountant found that at the time of her death, Mr. Kalosky owed $190,000 in personal credit card debt.
$190,000.
$190,000.
The debt was spread out over 41 different credit cards.
How do you even get 41 credit cards?
I have no idea.
So what was he spending the money on? To this day, no one looking into the case knows.
They were all cash advances.
Rex says Paula made a respectable middle-class income working at an insurance agency. But Robert was writing thousands of dollars of checks from the couple's joint account, floating the cash pulled from the credit cards.
Now, these are copies of the checks right here, and this is just a sample. John, it's got to be stunning for you to look at this.
It's stunning.
And to whom are those checks written?
The checks are written to numerous credit card companies and various organizations.
Reck believes Paula had found out about her husband's debt. He says not long before her death, she took over the checking account.
Then, 2 days before the death, Robert Kalosky started writing checks again out of that account from a different check series.
So another packet of checks.
Exactly.
Ephraim Sprecher represented Robert Kalosky in the wrongful death lawsuit.
He was in debt up to his eyeballs.
Well, you say that. I don't recall that being the case, though perhaps it was.
Despite what Steve Reck says is proof of Kalosky's debt, Sprecher wouldn't confirm it.
Dozens of credit cards.
I am not really
Cash
aware
advances.
that I'm not aware that at the time that lawsuit was begun, that was the case.
Kalosky's attorney could be correct,
You won't
because
get
by the time the wrongful death lawsuit was filed in 2004, Kalosky's debts should have all been wiped clean with money he got after his wife's death.
What did he stand to gain from this insurance policy?
About $450,000.
$450,000.
Yeah, about $450,000.
I don't know about the debt, and I don't know that that $400,000 figure is accurate.
But John Carbo was now convinced that his sister did not take her own life. He believes Kalosky's enormous debt and Paula's life insurance policy leads only to one conclusion.
So you think he killed your sister?
Absolutely.
An allegation his brother-in-law has always vehemently denied. Up next, Kalosky under oath, forced to answer questions about his wife's alleged suicide.
Do you recall whether or not you shot your wife in the head?
And now that another wife is dead, I go in search of answers.
Mr. Kalosky, are you there?
What do you think the odds are he killed his first wife?
0.
Second wife?
You know, I really don't know anything about it at all except reading a small article in a paper.